Hello YouTube fans, Richard Lewis here again with another video, and this one will be a long one. I'm not going to do my usual of pretending that the video is going to be quick and then 40 minutes later we're like, what the fuck happened? Basically this is going to be my end of year review, and by that I don't mean it's going to be my alternative awards. They're still going to be written up on Breitbart. I'm in the process of writing them now. The Gonzo Awards tradition will still stand, and you'll be able to read them very shortly. But this is more a summary about how I spent my 2015, a look at the stories that I broke, the work that I did, in some cases the events that I attended, although I think going over that might be a little bit moot, a little bit boring frankly. But as a result, this video will be quite a long one. It's kind of a way of curating all the work that I did and putting it in a one annual summary. So it's very much a 2015 from my perspective, a 2015 from the perspective of my work. So strap yourselves in, get a hot drink like I have, and let's go through it all. So we'll start in January. Oh, also, I will have to put my shiny glasses on at some point. I do apologise, but I guess for the majority of the reading, we'll have a nice little overlay for you. So the year started for me on the 2nd of January, as it very often does, where I released a story about H2K, the League of Legends, predominantly known as the League of Legends organisation, although they have a much richer history than that, and their public accusation that Fnatic were trying to poach members of their team. Now, Richard Wells, the H2K CEO, had got in touch with the Daily Dot, and basically he said that he had submitted a complaint to Riot about what he saw as a violation of the rules there. He showed me, at the time, he showed me evidence of Fnatic players and management who were directly contacting players who were under contract after H2K had been successful in their promotion to the LCS. And these particular players that were subject to improper approaches were Odemwamne and Hyanan. And this is back before Fnatic had managed to assemble the rookie team that we all know would go on to dominate Europe. So it's almost like looking back this far, it's almost like they dodged a bullet. It was quite fortuitous. But this all came off the back of they'd done a deal with the mid laner for Biven, and they obviously felt that the H2K lineup was going to be a big improvement over the players that they were losing that went to go and create Origin and that sort of thing. So very interesting look back at this story. And of course, nothing really came of it despite the complaints to Riot. Fnatic just said that they were looking into it internally and they were hoping to gain some clarity about what had happened, but ultimately nothing really came of this. And I guess it's an interesting contrast as well, because as we'll see much later in the year, H2K and TSM found themselves embroiled in a bit of a brouhaha over the approach of a player as well. But anyway, so that was the very first story that I dropped in January. I followed that up the very next day by leaking that Riot were planning an English broadcast of the LPL. And this was not necessarily a shocking story, because obviously Riot Games were wanting to control all of their broadcasts. And the LPL, the Tencent LoL Pro League, had been a bit of an outlier. It had sort of been operating in this limbo where they were allowing amateur fans to bring an English broadcast to the audience, and this was obviously something that Riot was never going to allow to stand. In fact, traditionally Riot's model seems to be they're happy to have somebody take their product, make it popular, or take an element of their product and make it popular, and then when it becomes popular, or they can see that there's profit in it, or they have some other weird concerns based around their business ethos, they wrestle back control of it and basically push everyone out to sea like the Eskimos, and that's just it. Where you go and you freeze to death. Now, we talked about this often over the year, but at the time I released this story, it was quite shocking. This was when people thought, well, Kelsey Moser and Froskerin and Pyrotechnics had all done a really good job. And interest in the Chinese region was really peaking, really spiking. And of course, there was lots of high-profile players now heading out to China that people wanted to see. So what happened here was that Riot brought it back, and everyone thought, well, they'll keep the old team together. Well, no, they absolutely didn't. They did internal assessments on the LPL English staff, and they basically said, my sources told me, that they didn't consider Kelsey a caster at all, so she was out. They were never going to let Kelsey Moser anywhere near a broadcast. Pyrotechnics was granted an interview, and of course we all know how that worked out. And for Froskerin, they had a very strange relationship with. It's well known, it's well documented by now, that actually Riot had prevented Froskerin having casting gigs at Intel Extreme Masters when ESL wanted to use her to add a bit more diversity to the broadcast. And it's not just about diversity, actually. She's very talented, very opinionated, and a good box office, in my opinion. But Riot had put a stop to that, and Riot were basically saying that she was a risk based on her social media presence, and she was told that if she wanted any chance of working on any broadcasts, she was going to have to tone that down, dial that down a little bit. So, as it happened, she wasn't immediately brought in, but she did get there in the end. I think after this story came out, it started a kind of snowball towards why are Riot so obsessed with what people say on Twitter, what people say on Reddit, what people say on shows like Summoning Insight and First Blood. And as a result, in the end, she eventually got the opportunity that she so rightly deserves. But, yeah, so we all know now that how it worked out. But this was quite a shocking story at the time, predominantly because they were giving such a short deal, the short end of the stick, to the people that had done all this admirable work in bringing the broadcast to the fans. January the 5th, you can see how prolific I used to be back before the League of Legends community had shat on me and the subreddit had banned my work, which we'll get into a little bit later in the year. This was a story about how Last Shadow, the coach of Meet Your Makers, had left the team. Now, there was nothing new in this. Last Shadow has had a few, how shall we say, short-term relationships with organizations in the past. But this was an interesting one because obviously he'd been there with the former Super Hot crew and team and the transition into Meet Your Makers. And when he decided to leave, it was sort of the beginning of the end. It pointed to some serious underlying problems. He didn't put any blame on the manager that he was dealing with or the players, but he was saying that there was something with the organisation. Now, it would later transpire Meet Your Makers would have all of these problems, in fact, would violated Riot's own rules, would get into some disgusting and deplorable behaviour in threatening players. But this was really the first inkling that all wasn't as it seemed with Meet Your Makers, and indeed Last Shadow would come out a little bit later and say he was owed money. Then on January the 8th, we move over to CSGO. I was very proud to reveal that FACEIT, one of the real success stories in esports, truly one of the rare success stories. They went from being a startup with a very, it wasn't a particularly original business model, but they made it work, and they made it work by doing things right and seeing things out to the end, not overspending, and doing things with a very long-term view in place. and this was the story that they were going to have a $250,000 prize pool in 2015. Now, that might not set your eyes spinning like a fruit machine here in January 2016, but back at the time, this was a big deal for an online league. It was a huge increase on the prize money that had been paid out in 2014, which was approximately $100,000, so it was over double, and it was going to be spread out over the course of a year-long league season with 3 land finals across the course of that season. Now, again, we've seen such huge growth in CSGO that the number $250,000 has become some sort of benchmark. If you don't offer $250,000, you're not considered a serious tournament. But at the time, this showed that Face It were real major players in the space, and they continue to be so. We saw a fantastic season over the course of the year, and Face It, for me, have provided some of the memorable moments, all cast as well by a fantastic stable of on-screen talent and production talent. So I was real happy to announce this. I don't know how Face It felt about it, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Then, of course, January, the big story that dominated January was the match fixing of the former iBuyPower team. And we finally got to the bottom of this in January. I spent so much time on this story. I needed time off from my regular duties. My editor kindly gave them to me. And by January the 16th, I finally had what I needed to do, which was, finally got all the confirmation that the match between iBuyPower and Netcode Guides, the 16-4, I think it was, trouncing, was actually a fixed game. Now, this represented months and months of investigation for me. Starting back with a young junior journalist sent me some screenshots that he'd got from the professional player Shazam Khan, and he sent me them because he said he was concerned and he didn't really know what to do with them. Now, when I looked at them, I had to be honest, I had my doubts as to the veracity of them initially, because I know Shazam is a, how should we say, controversial character. He has been engaged in some behavior in the North American scene that would make him a target. People would want to fake screenshots to incriminate him. So I had to really dig deep and go out on a limb here. When I saw the initial screen grabs, the journalist, swore on his honor that these were legitimate. He provided, all the relevant substantiating information, and then I had to go and speak to Shazam. Now, initially there were, of course, denials, and then privately I was told the match was a fix. I mean, for me, it was always self-evident. They weren't particularly subtle. If you go back and watch the VOD, this was a very obvious throw, unfortunately. But there hadn't been any punishments doled out at this point for match fixing. Nothing really serious. No one had. People knew it was going on, but nobody really did anything about it. Now, I dug as deep as I could into this. Now, all of this basically came together because one of the people involved, the Talked player, Derek D. Bourne, had actually sent texts detailing the nature of the throw to his girlfriend, who was also another player, another ESEA player. And he had treated her in a less than healthy way for a relationship, and also as well she had ethical concerns about what had happened, and she could see how they were getting away with it and being given a platform to denigrate me and to insult me and to say I was lying and that I was making it up. And she decided to come forward, and she gave us the screenshots from the phone, which had actually already been leaked publicly, but the community downvoted them and said they were fake, said they were made up through a text generator. We were able to confirm the veracity of these text messages by checking the phone, and thanks to Ashley, Black Lotus is the girlfriend, we were able to find out the mechanics of how the throw happened. Now, basically what this was when the fix was in, when the team had agreed to do the fix, they contacted somebody who had multiple accounts, a guy called Duc Cud Pham, who was a Vietnamese student in the US. He'd been around the NA professional scene for a while, played in Lunatic when they won the main division in the 15th season, and he basically had access to hundreds of Steam accounts, and he supplemented his income through skins betting and trading, selling keys for virtual cases, this kind of thing. And he placed the bets. Now, this was the part of the chain we never got up until this point, that in all of the investigation that I'd done previously, all we had were witness statements, all we had were, yeah, it was a fix, we got told to bet this way. We didn't have anything substantial in the terms of this is who placed the bets and this was how much. And that was the thing we could never find. I'd reached out to CSGO Lounge where the bets were placed, and we'd looked around their main accounts. No one had really placed anything on their mains. We couldn't find any alts. So we were really at a loss to find the chain. Well, thanks to these texts we did. We got access. Well, we could see who Cud's accounts were. We could see the bets. Thanks to the fact we knew also as well he was Vietnamese, we could also flag Vietnamese accounts, and he obviously told some friends. And very quickly, thanks to the efforts of, I think it's Courtney Honey Timpson, I think his name is. Apologies if the surname's wrong, Courtney. But thanks to the efforts there, we went through every account, we looked at the bets, when they were placed, who placed them, any ties to any other accounts, and we could quickly collate just how much had been bet in this particular instance. To substantiate it further, the CSGO Lounge admins interviewed Cud. He was incredibly defensive in the interview about what happened, and CSGO Lounge had suspicions about it being a fix for some time because they did see some unusual betting patterns. But of course, without this narrative that was around, it was incredibly hard to prove one way or the other. Anyway, once we'd got the texts, once we'd confirmed the texts, we put it out there into the public domain. I forwarded it on to Valve, and Valve did what Valve had to do. You know, they investigated it and they issued the bans that, of course, we've spent the rest of the year discussing. Now, it wasn't until the 27th that the bans would get implemented, and I still wasn't sure what was going to happen here. With all this evidence, I had no idea if it'd be a life ban. I had no idea if Valve would take any action at all. But for me, I'd done my part. It was now 99.99% certain that the fix had happened. The only thing we needed was for Valve to confirm the receiving of the skins. I'd done everything else for Valve. And this was happening, of course, just before MLG Aspen. The iBuyPower guys were in talks to join the Evil Geniuses organization, or rather some offshoot of GGA. We presume it was EG, even though the paperwork was being handled by Kelly Milkey, hence why she's been ripping on me for the rest of this year, because she thinks I ruined their lives. She obviously doesn't have a problem with match fixing, which is a great position to take as a manager of a prominent gaming organization for Dota 2, which of course has had match fixing in the past. How nice that is. But they were going to obviously bring Hiko in to that team, And I remember at this time I called Hiko up and I said, brother, the ban hammer's coming down. There's only way for you to go back to Cloud9 or unburn that bridge. I strongly recommend you do it. Hiko obviously didn't want to do that, and that was fine. It's his choice. He's an adult, and and also as well, I told Steele in advance that if you come out and you admit what happened now, maybe Valve will take it easier on you. Nobody wanted to believe that Valve were going to act, so that's what happened on the 27th, and they were issued, like I say, the bans that are, as we now know, indefinite and aren't very likely to be reviewed. So that was the big story for me, or possibly of the whole year, and it came really early. Now, it didn't stop there, of course. By the 21st, we knew that the XI by Power players had to pull out of MLG Aspen. Now, the team cited there were travel issues for the reason for missing this event, but there was so much stuff going on in the background, it wasn't really clear whether that was true or not, and indeed they had been in talks with Evil Geniuses. Evil Geniuses had been booking their travel. They were going to be going there, and even if they weren't representing EG were going to sort of pay for them to attend as a show of faith for when they would then later announce them to join the organisation. It could have also been MLG. I'd kept MLG abreast of the investigation privately, just saying this could be bad for your tournament if this story, if Valve were to act in the middle of this huge North American event being held as part of X Games. So I don't know if MLG basically had a quiet word with them and maybe said, look, we don't think it's appropriate you attend while these allegations are being investigated by Valve. Maybe that did. Regardless, Team Liquid jumped in as a replacement. Everybody at this point was still like, well, now we just have to wait and see what Valve do. Richard Lewis could still be lying. I mean, this wasn't even a slam dunk for me at this point, even though, again, I think anyone with a brain could see that this was 99.9% accurate, and that there was no other explanation other than a fix. I don't think people really were on board with that. I think I was still basically getting cunted off on social media. I spent the next few days adding some extra strands to the narrative. So I reached out to a very, very prominent CSGO gambler on January the 22nd called Joe My God DeMarco. And he said how Derek D. Bourne had come into this massive amount of skins shortly after the game. And he had sold $1,200 of skins just a few days afterwards, which, interestingly enough, the $1,200 was a sixth of the $7,000 that Derek had stated had been transferred into his account. And if you think about it, with 5 players and one other member of the conspiracy, that would, of course, make 6. So that would be enough for him and 5 players. So again, this started to fit this narrative that the fix actually happened. And DeMarco was quite a well-known gambler, and therefore was very good at offloading skins quite quickly. And he provided a full transaction history of the skins and how much money he got. And he said that he hadn't come forward before now because he wasn't really paying much attention. He heard about fixes all the time. Again, there was also some substantiating evidence from a guy called Chris Sheehan, who had, who went public about basically saying, there was a lot of fixing going on in the scene, and it wasn't just about betting. It was actually about fixing positions so people's friends could remain in invite and this kind of thing. So all of a sudden we were starting to see the NA scene was dirty, that it was actually had a lot of corruption going on, a lot more problems than perhaps people wanted to recognize. So on January the 27th, of course, the Valve banhammer came down. It was official. It was a strange day for me. I woke up that day quite late. Because I'd been staying up working on some other stories. The whole ordeal had put a lot of strain on the relationship with my girlfriend of 4.5 years, and I was working late nights. I wasn't coming to bed. I was drinking quite a lot because it was a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. Basically, if Valve hadn't have come out and done what they did, I'd have been still considered a laughing stock by the scene. My entire reputation was pretty much staked on this story, and it was very, very stressful time for me. When I woke up, my Skype, it was like, had like, I don't know, something like 100 messages. My Twitter had a bunch of DMs, 500 plus notifications, and obviously the ban had been issued, and it was a bittersweet day. I think I spent the first 48 hours kind of almost like internally gloating and being quite smug. And then it sort of it dawned on me that, Counter-Strike was never going to be the same after this, that I'd published a piece of work that had changed the Counter-Strike landscape forever, and we wouldn't know how good or bad that was for quite some time. So it was really strange. I without wanting to blow my own trumpet, I think we'll look back on that story as one of the biggest esports stories of all time. I think it was almost like the final step away from the amateur scene into this new professional era for Counter-Strike, certainly. And it was one of the first big crossover stories that the mainstream media really latched onto and started realizing, yeah, this is a real thing. There's real scandals, there's real stories, there's real money to be made, and it was really profound. I think if I never wrote a story or never did an investigation as good as that ever again, I'd feel really comfortable with my contribution towards esports journalism. I'm glad the Daily Dot were the recipients of that story. They'd supported me incredibly throughout that 6-month period. My editor, Kevin Morris, was fantastic, gave me all the resources and time off while I was investigating it. And that story, to this day, remains one of the biggest they've ever published. And I don't know if it'll ever be trumped, in all honesty, despite the better efforts of some great young journalists that they've got there now. And again, I'm not saying that to be arrogant. It was a real fortuitous thing, like if that first journalist doesn't come at me with those chat logs, none of this ever happened. It's like I don't investigate that, If CS:GO Lounge didn't cooperate, we're at an impasse. It was if Derek's girlfriend doesn't come forward, this was like it was a war of attrition. It was about not giving up on the story. I think most journalists would have, especially in esports, where the long investigation isn't really appreciated. So it's about what you publish today. It's about getting clicks today. So on the 27th, when it all came out, I was still publishing other stories, which was TSM. And this goes to show you how things can change in a year. I published a story saying that TSM were becoming the highest paid CSGO team in the world. And this was that they were getting something like $3,000, $4,000 a month, and in fact it was actually, I think it might have even been more than that, and that they were getting 100% of sticker money and 100% of like streaming revenue and everything else. And this is because TSM were particularly desperate to get into CSGO at this time, and in particular, particularly desperate, I think, to poach Team Dignitas because of this ongoing rivalry between Reginald and Odie. So it was a very big annual salary at the time. Of course, by the end of the year, they would be one of the sort of lower paid top tier teams, which shows how far it had come. And what made this story super interesting for me was the way that all these other organizations came out and started to wave their fucking dick around, saying, oh, no, we are the highest paid organization in the world. Definitely fuck TSM. They're not paying as much as we are. Well, how much are you paying? Well, we'd rather not say. So that was what was going on there. But this was, again, the sort of the good times for TSM. They hit the ground running, and it just goes to show how this team was kind of serially mismanaged along the way, that they ended up leaving the organization by the end of the year, not wanting to re-sign, and TSM are sort of now left scrambling, looking for another replacement team. Just to keep the match-fixing thing alive, The next day, on January the 28th, I conducted some more investigations into fixed games, which were kind of branching off from the main investigation I'd done into iBuyPower. And this was that CSGO Lounge had decided that they were going to suspend a group of UK players, which also had ties to Steel and Mo, from North America. They were going to ban their games from featuring on CSGO Lounge due to some unusual betting patterns and unusual results based on that. And in fact, we found that there was even ties to the iBuyPower players that had they'd bet on these particular games anyway. So this was a much smaller thing, but it had ties to the main ring, the main betting ring that was betting on all these North American fixes as well. Derek Cudfam, for example, he was placed. I think they placed bets on this game. So it was very interesting that this was sort of continuing, and it pointed to the fact that there had been this almost endemic problem where smaller teams were getting away with it because there wasn't any attention being paid to them. So the statement was that we agree. There was some also other scandals involved. A scandal. I mean, this wasn't really a scandal, but Hyphen had some problems in ESL because they were streaming matches, and they had placed a bet on their own team while they were playing. So there was all of this kind of weird stuff going on around it. But this wasn't really a team. They were sort of a mix of players that kind of knew each other from the UK. Some players, of course, would end up in easy skins. And it was just a bit of fun, I think. But there were certainly some concerns about some of the bets that had been placed, and as a result, CSGO Lounge took action. It wasn't a particularly big scalp, but it was very important. And then I ended the month by basically doing an interview with Braxton Swag Pierce about what happened in the iBuyPower setup. And Swag basically said that he explained some of the minutiae that was perhaps confusing people. He explained how the fix came about. He explained why the fix came about, and that, according to him, it was Dazed Sam Marine who was kind of driving it and kept bringing it up and saying we should do this. And in the end, they agreed, and it's quite a sad story for him. I mean, if it's the way that he's telling it. He was the youngest guy in the team, and he's obviously suffered the same penalty as the rest of them. But that interview kind of shed a bit more light on it, and I think almost was like kind of the start of this whole #FreeSwag thing. Now, obviously, not everyone necessarily agrees with that. Some people say that when you're that age anyway, 17 or 18 or whatever it was, you're certainly old enough to know right from wrong, and you should be held accountable. If you're old enough to be a professional player, then you're old enough to live by professional standards. Other people believe that Swag was some sort of unwitting victim almost of being persuaded and influenced by the people around him, which again, that's fine if you want to subscribe to that belief. But this, for me, was kind of the start of really looking at whether or not we should have sympathy towards this particular player. So that rounded out January. I didn't have to wait long in February until I got another big story, and this was a big story not just because of what it represented and who was involved, but it was also like a big story because of the way that we obtained the information. Again, it was a bit more like real investigative journalism, and that was on February the 8th. We revealed that Corey from MYM, Meet Your Makers, who we've already mentioned earlier in the year, they threatened him. A manager actually threatened him with taking his mother's house away, and this was done because his mother had signed the contract agreement and was therefore liable as the guarantor. So he wanted to leave the team. He wanted to go to a team that was based, I believe, in Canada, a team called Team Raw. It's basically a collection of misfits, if we're being honest about it. But Corey wanted to go there. He didn't want to play in MYM anymore. And we uncovered a recording, basically, of a manager punching doors, walls, shouting, being very aggressive, and threatening to take his mother's house away. I had to go some distance to make the player feel secure, to get the recordings, to put everything in place. And this story was huge because it confirmed in a lot of people's minds what I think any of us who've worked in the scene for a while actually know, and that is that player welfare is like this thing that just gets shelved, and players actually do have to play in horrible conditions and are occasionally bullied and held hostage by contracts that they don't necessarily get legal consultation for or have guardians look over. And that was the case here. The upshot of this was that the manager who made the threats got banned and Mecha Makers got fined. It was a very small amount, but and there was a rumor that Corey had actually ended up paying this amount by an internal fine that MYM issued to him. Now, this was just a ridiculous story. Riot handled it poorly, but it set the ball in motion for Corey to get somewhere better, and it also set the wheels in motion for MYM to go under, which I'm absolutely not sad about at all in the slightest, because they were a terrible organisation, terribly run, and as you would reveal later in the year with a big expose that I spent months writing, they were inarguably corrupt and have no place in esports, and none of the individuals involved with the organisation do. Just to demonstrate this, after that story, I took a break. I was still really wore out with all of the drama surrounding the iBuyPower situation, and to get a big story come round this quickly afterwards really took it out of me. So I took another break. By the time I got back on February the 17th, we had this MYM exodus. Mima was going to be the next to leave. We knew Corey was poised to leave the organisation. Obviously, his position was kind of untenable in the eyes of the management, and equally, he felt comfortable now moving on because MYM couldn't do anything to him at that point. If they did, it would have been an absolute shitstorm. So we reported on that the MYM was going to lose all of its players. And just to mention this as well, I published this op-ed around about the same time, which I won't include a lot of op-eds in here, but the ones that I'm particularly pleased about, I will. This was an opinion piece about a situation that kind of came up, which was Hotshot, the owner of Team CLG, had made a joke about Reginald looking like Wukong over a bet they had about the loser of the game was going to have to dye their hair pink. Reginald said he would look like Vi if he dyed his hair pink, and I believe Hotshot said something about pink Wukong or something. Anyway, this was met with very strange response, because many of you will, of course, recall that Thorin, my colleague and co-host on By the Numbers, you will recall when he compared Reginald to the character Caesar from the new Planet of the Apes movies. Everybody was up in arms saying that this was racist. It was racist to compare Reginald to a character of an ape, even though the ape is essentially human and has human personality and human qualities, and it was these qualities, these personality traits, that Thorin was alluding to in his example. So I wrote an opinion piece about basically how this was hypocritical, and it as always, whenever you put the mirror on the League of Legends community and show how stupid they actually are and how hypocritical they are and how they're driven by popularity and they sit in an echo chamber and basically repeat the same lies to each other to believe them, and they are just a disgusting collection. That they're responsible for some of the worst mobs you'll ever come across on the internet. Well, of course, they had tried everything in their power to get Thorin fired and ultimately contributed to him having to leave On Gamers. And yet, here we had Hotshot doing the exact same thing, and they weren't interested in doing that at all. They said that it was being blown out of all proportion. So naturally, I released my opinion piece, which did the usual trajectory of being really popular, getting to the front page, then the echo chamber being subverted, the vote brigaders turning up, and it coming right down to 0 points or below. That was how it always worked. I mean, you can see for yourself here from that Reddit thread just how retarded the average people are you have to deal with. He said, like, the top comment in it is, League community can't be hypocritical because it's made up of many different opinions. For example, I don't give a shit that Thorin compared Reginald to Caesar from Planet of the Apes, and I don't give a shit about Hotshot saying something about Pink Wukong or whatever. You want to know why people made a big deal about Thorin saying it? Because lots of people don't like Thorin, and they used it as ammunition to attack somebody they don't like. Well, that was my point. That was indeed the point of that was the whole point of the fucking article. So how very nice of you to point that out, while no doubt simultaneously downvoting the piece. And you can see other comments here. It's a silly article. Of course it's an opinion piece, and again, they go down this whole idea of, like, the community's too big to make any conclusions about. Well, actually, you can look at the consensus of any community and make an assumption about them. That's like a democracy. You can say, for example, the United Kingdom is pro for freedom to practice religion based on the laws of the land that we have, even though there's many people that would be against religion, many atheists that would like to just abolish religion. The consensus is that we're going to allow it. So what, can I not say that now? Can we not make any generalizations? But of course, and yeah, obviously you can check who wrote the article at this point. I'm not sure if he's a troll or just that fucking dense. Obviously, I'm dense, and you can see people are like, the Daily Dot is a shithole, they don't do journalism right. And think about the two big stories that we've just broken, and that's the attitude you get from this community whenever you publish an opinion piece. Honestly, they are a disgusting collection of cretins, and the moderators that allow these cretins to basically denigrate people's work and abuse people like this are just as bad. But anyway, so I did want to highlight that because I thought it was a very interesting point. Never has the hypocrisy of the League of Legends community been laid so bare. And I thought it was a well-written article, but of course that doesn't make any difference. Downvote and move on. And then I ended the month, which was, a fairly slow month with all the drama and all that, and just recuperating with the news that Horo, of course, was going to leave MYM as his relationship deteriorated. Not really a surprise after everything that happened. There was talk about money being owed by this point, and the story was really starting to build that MYM wasn't just poorly run. There was some more sinister stuff actually going on underneath the surface. So March 2015 is pretty much where everything for me would change. It would be a career-altering month for a lot of reasons, and it put a lot of fucking stress on me. This was the month where I really came close to kind of just getting out of all of this. It just wasn't worth it at the time. We'll get into that. So I started the month by doing something that I'd been sort of making a trend of, which was I'd met a bunch of lawyers and legal experts, particularly pertaining to contract and image rights and IP, the kind of people that we need in esports to help players get what they're due. And I was routinely now, whenever I was getting contracts, I was sending these contracts to these legal minds for analysis and then publishing the results publicly on the Daily Dot. And obviously with all of the brouhaha with Meet Your Makers, it was quite natural to follow up. The findings in this were amazing because Anna Baumann, it's Anna B. Baumann, who happens to be a German law graduate and PhD researcher and lecturer. The contracts were for Germany, so she was an ideal choice for this. And she basically went through and talked about how the contract was essentially in two parts, and therefore it wouldn't necessarily stand up. And it was a combination of basically a marketing contract and an employment contract, and under German law they're typically kept separate. There were several other things in the contract that just simply weren't fair on the players, and some things that also wouldn't hold up under German employment law. And Anna went through and completely ripped it apart, and we published the results for that, which again was a step forward, not just for the players in MYM, but also for other League of Legends players in smaller organizations who were able to start assessing, well, does my contract look like this? Am I getting fucked over? Should I be talking to lawyers? And Anna said that as a result of this article and as a result of the pieces we published in the Daily Dot, she was getting a lot of work. And a lot of work, I mean, doesn't mean a lot of money, because obviously she was doing most of it pro bono. But a lot of work means a lot of players starting to have this awareness, this awakening that what we need to do is start really looking long and hard at contracts and making sure we're getting a fair deal. It's not just enough to be promised the dream, and it's not just enough to be told that, yes, you are a player and you're playing video games for a living, so that's it. You shouldn't really reach any higher than that. You don't have to work a boring 9 to 5 job. Well, of course, if you worked a boring 9 to 5 job, chances are you'd be financially better off and you'd have a lot more hours to enjoy the rest of your life. That's certainly my findings anyway, from over a decade in esports. Now, bit of StarCraft news that I broke. I came out and managed to get the exclusive on announcing the Legacy of the Void beta date. Which of course isn't a big deal, probably isn't a big deal to the people who follow my work, but just want to put that in there, that yes, on March the 3rd I was the individual that broke that story, and I think I got picked up by the mainstream gaming press, although I'm not too sure. Then this was a smaller story, but one that I'm kind of proud of. On March the 5th, there was a Turkish challenger team who had their spot being held to ransom by a former player who he'd registered the spot and was basically saying, I want to kick players and play with like 4 fucking silver players or whatever, and just lose the spot, or you can buy the spot from me, after he'd had a falling out with the players after they said they wanted to move him to sub or kick him out of the team altogether because they didn't feel he was good enough. And as the registrant, he was basically saying, well, look, if I'm not going to be part of it, you guys can't be part of it, even though we've collectively earned this opportunity. Pay me 20,000 euros, I'll get fucked. So I took this I took this story on, even though I knew it wasn't going to necessarily generate big news. But the reason for it being, first of all, this team obviously didn't really have a voice. There wasn't anyone else they could reach out to. Nobody else was going to really pick up this story because, first of all, no one writes about Riot and all the fucked up shit they do and the fucked up nature of the challenger system and just problems in League of Legends anyway, because you end up ostracized like me. And also as well, it wasn't going to generate a lot of traffic. It wasn't a big story, but I went with it anyway. And of course, at the heart of the story was JT Teaser or Tizer Vanden Brie. He was kind of again guilty of not doing the proper thing, and kind of just letting these players get fucked over, which is par for the course. But that was a story I was particularly proud of. Then I followed that up with on March 16th an interview with Vortic, League of Legends' most infamous troll. You'll have seen him, of course, in YouTube comments. You'll have seen him tweeting. you'll have seen him making these parody videos. And I always thought this guy was quite a clever troll, actually, in the sense that he perfectly parodied the level of idiocy of the average sort of League of Legends bronze player who's like, oh, I'm in Elo hell, I can't get out of it. But not just that, he also perfectly parodied the League of Legends culture, their obsession with, girl streamers and toxicity and this kind of thing. So I hit it off with him straight away and got the opportunity to do an interview where it wasn't clear to me whether or not he was still in character. Of course, this being a League of Legends interview, obviously everybody was sort of mocking me for doing this. So again, think about all the stories I've broken up until this point, and the reaction from the League of Legends community was more hard-hitting journalism from Richard Lewis. This must have been the first sort of frivolous article I'd written all year, and one of the very rare ones that was kind of fun to do. But really proud of that interview and sort of helping him get a little bit more exposure, but also sort of unveiling a little bit more about him and his motivations behind it, which weren't even flattering towards the League of Legends community. It was pretty funny. So I enjoyed that, and I thought that was a big sort of standout piece. I followed that up on March 17th with an interview with the StarCraft streamer Evan Winter-Balnick, who had become the #1 StarCraft streamer on Twitch, but of course was dogged by these allegations of viewbotting, which I personally believe he was guilty of, in all honesty. But I put that to one side. I did an interview with him, and this was after a Reddit thread blew up, and somebody had effectively proven that there were view bots on his stream. Somebody had done these measurements, these metrics, and this forced Winter into coming out and saying, look, someone might be viewbotting my channel. I think somebody is viewbotting my channel, but it's beyond my control. It's nothing to do with me. Now my co-host from Unfiltered, Destiny, was tweeting and all of this, tweeting like ridiculous tweets like, raise my kids, from a boy, take him to his first day of college. He turns around, viewbot all along, just ridiculous stuff like this. But I gave him a platform to put his side of the story across, even though I didn't necessarily believe that side of the story. And that was an interview that was quite popular, well received, and I sort of think, again, we're always going to have U-bot controversies on Twitch. I don't think, actually, many of them have been quite as high profile as Winter. Obviously, at the moment, we've got Masan. But I thought this was kind of, not an important interview in the grand scheme of things, but it was important in terms of this ongoing issue. What do we do about view-botting? And people who engage in view-botting have always got this excuse of, it could just be somebody doing it for me. At what point are we going to change the rules, change how it works, change something so view-botting isn't viable anymore? And Twitch still haven't answered that question. They didn't answer that question throughout 2015. We're in early 2016. I don't think we're any further forward. Now, this was probably the biggest story overall of the year for me, actually. Yes, the CSGO and the MYM stories were huge, but this one had mainstream crossover appeal. I got some sources who basically told me that YouTube were going to relaunch their live streaming service and focus on esports and gaming moving forward, and the sources were really good, and of course it all came to pass. Now, what was interesting was I published this on March the 24th. Within 24 hours, I was being invited on American TV tech programs to talk about this, getting mentioned through mainstream tech media, which has never happened to me before. And I was doing all these interviews about it, clarifying some points, and of course it blew up again because YouTube replied to me with a GIF when I asked them officially for comment, and that became a separate story in its own right as well, which was fucking surreal. But this was a real big story. This got me on television, so it was a really weird that it blew up. I thought it was kind of almost, I thought it would just get filed away and would just be ignored, but it was actually a really, really big story. I continued to write about hacking which is, again, I'm one of the few journalists that sort of touches that, like actual cheating in games. Big taboo about it, which I've never really understood. If you want a competitive, if you want competitive integrity in your environment, you have to talk about these things. You've got to talk about the technology that's out there. You can't just cover it up. You can't just pretend it's not happening. Now, I know a few people who create these hacks and code, and I always talk to them, and I don't judge them for their choices. I never have done, which is why I feel comfortable adding them on Skype or whatever and getting their side of the story. I'm not looking to demonize anyone. I just want to present the facts. Well, on March 25th, I did a story that it blew up because it was one of those funny little amusing stories, and that was that a very popular bot for League of Legends called Bot of Legends, people who were using it were finding that their hard drives were getting wiped if they used a particular type of script, and that was because a rival scripter had put some malicious code in it, which didn't get discovered until too late. And this story was deemed to be pretty hilarious. It, of course, wasn't allowed on the League of Legends subreddit because it talks about hacks, talks about scripting. And even though anyone with Google could find out about it, apparently I was advertising for them. So, part of the ongoing issue with me in the League of Legends subreddit, which, of course, this month is the month where things would come to a head. This is the month I got banned from the League of Legends subreddit after being harassed serially by the new moderators that they brought in, particularly Sarah Botts, who must have warned me 10, 12 times for making throwaway comments. I was getting threatened with bans for reacting to some of the abuse I've included in this video, which happened literally every time I published a story, by the way. Moderators did absolutely nothing about it. People were calling me a liar, a moron. If I called them a liar or a moron back, I would get warned or banned. And Sarah Botts had come in, and she's a big, like say, a social justice warrior type. She's had ties with, like SRS and SRD, that's Shit Reddit Says, and Subreddit Drama, who are these notorious social justice warrior subreddits that actually do harass people and do dox people and have made multiple people's lives a misery. She's the mod on Data is Beautiful, a subreddit that has been shown to be demonstrably corrupt on multiple occasions. They massage the front page to get like AMAs up there and engage in all sorts of manipulation, and they do it all with the admin's blessing, of course. So when she moved into becoming a League of Legends moderator, she was looking to make a name for herself, and she latched onto me as the means to do it, and was literally just replying to me all the time, warning me, and I just told her to fuck off because she's a nobody. She's never going to achieve anything with her life. Her job is actually, while it's very altruistic, it's a bit demeaning in my opinion. It's not something I'd ever want to do with my life. And she's never going to do anything worthwhile. She's never going to make a worthwhile contribution. Her worthwhile contribution was to harass me and try and threaten me with being banned from the subreddit. She's a fucking nobody. But anyway, basically what happened was, around about the time this was getting banned, I'd been working on several stories about the subreddit, which of course was basically to underline that they did have a relationship with Riot, that they were being influenced by pro players, big companies, and I proved this inarguably in March. The penalty I've had to pay for proving that is that they've attempted to ruin my whole career. They've slowed the growth of my YouTube channel. They've slowed they've completely reduced the number of hits I get on all of my articles. They've tried to pressure to get me fired from the Daily Dot, which was part of the reason why I left. I didn't want to put them through it anymore because they do have a very different model of the publication I'm at now, Breitbart. They have smeared my name, as you'll see, and yeah, it was simply incredible that these people have been allowed to do this group of Reddit moderators, and nobody's ever told the side of the story where I'm the guy getting fucked over. And this was all predicated on that I allegedly told a suicidal user who had posted in a Suicide Watch, I think was the subreddit I was accused of, user telling him to kill himself. Never happened. A user was telling me to grow up after I insulted Sarah Botts, I think it was, or some other user, and I said, "You're telling me to grow up." I laughed and I linked to a post he'd made, which was, the title was something like, "I live with my parents and I've ruined their lives." So I didn't read the post. It was in Off My Chest. It wasn't in Suicide Watch, and I basically was pointing out that I'm laughing at you because you're telling me to grow up and you still live with your parents and you're obviously dependent on your parents and you're ruining their lives. I didn't read the post. Now, apparently in the post, which I think's been deleted now, the last line was something like, I'm seriously thinking about killing myself, or I'm thinking about killing myself. Now, I didn't read that, I didn't know that. And the user, who was on a throwaway, there was only 5 posts in the history, so I wasn't digging into his history. There was 5 posts in total. The user then posted something direct to me saying, "The fact that people like you exist is going to make it a lot easier for me to make the decision to kill myself. Goodbye." And I just thought, this is a little bit melodramatic. It's highly unlikely, it's highly unbelievable that this is actually a suicidal user. This is like a play for sympathy. But ultimately, as somebody that's been around suicide and done a lot with mental health, charities, and had big conversations about mental health in esports and how we can't keep ignoring it, and with recent events with Gosu, I think we can all identify with that. I thought better treat it seriously and dignify it with a response. So I replied to him saying, "Look, I definitely don't want you to kill yourself, and if you ever want to talk, definitely do that. I got a lot of experience in this. Let's talk to me." And of course, the individual never replied. Meanwhile, in the private moderator chat, and I know because I got leaked the logs for this, they were all fighting over which one was going to ban me for telling a user to commit suicide. Of course, it never happened, didn't happen. But that's what that's the conclusion they arrived. That's how they spun it. That was the excuse they'd been looking for the entire time. So they banned me, and it was bad timing because I was releasing these stories about them. The first of which was that they removed a video from the YouTuber called Nazis, who was criticizing What the Fast, which is basically a routing program that claims to make your internet faster. It's like downloading RAM. I mean, it's gibberish. It probably helps a handful of people, and it's a routing problem. It doesn't do some of the stuff it claims to do. Nazis made a video about it saying, "Why are YouTubers advertising this product?" And of course, they're doing it for money. That was his point. He referred to the product as being snake oils, a characterization I don't entirely disagree with. And as a result, his video was removed for witch hunting. Now, what I uncovered was that prior to that removal, the mods had been contacted by Voyboy, who had asked them directly, "Why hasn't this been removed for witch hunting?" And it was a private message, and the mods, including the erstwhile Korean Terran, basically then changed their tune and said, "Well, this needs to be banned, it's witch hunting." So the punchline of this story is Voyboy is sponsored by What the Fast. So, and we also know that Voyboy has several of the mods on Skype directly. This has been proven by things that were leaked in the mod group chat. Obviously, Adagio Summoner, aka Lilybet, is a moderator who's dealt with him directly multiple times. So he had direct access to the mods, and as a result, they mysteriously decided that this video needed to be banned. They removed Nazi's hard work, they prevented him reaping the dividends, generating awareness, and they did it because they were basically being told to by Voyboy. And I even proved that they had changed their mind after Voyboy had been messaged. There is a moderator called Pickflute who had said he had no issue with the thread, and then after the Voyboy message, he suddenly changed his mind, which just goes to show, popularity goes a long way. Now, the moderators hated that I'd published that story, but it didn't end there. Thanks to a moderator who had joined the team and had come forward and revealed lots of stuff in the back area, their hidden little area, their hidden forum, we were able to find out that Reddit moderators had signed a non-disclosure agreement with Riot Games, which is, of course, a legally binding contract, and an NDA is basically, you know, a non-disclosure agreement. You cannot discuss the things that you discuss with Riot staff members. You are legally, there is a legal ramification if you do. If you disclose some information Riot don't want you to, they have legal recourse against you. Now, the NDA was completely optional, but if you wanted to sit in this secret little Skype room where the Reddit moderators and Riot staff members all congregated, and again, we've subsequently shown that in this chat room, Riot moderators give feedback about what threads should be called and how they should be worded, and how the overall feedback about server outage should be put there. If it makes it look like Riot are making a mistake, or if it looks at like they're being subject to attack or whatever, they intervene and say, no, can you change that? So it's not just a straight communication of information. They've never even explained why you would need an NDA to say, hey, the server's going to be down for 12 hours. Can you tell everyone about that? Yeah, sure. Why would you need an NDA for that? It's actually the opposite. You want them to disclose it on your behalf to the subreddit. The NDA is there to protect all the other stuff they talk about. But anyway, I revealed that they had the NDA in place. And Riot released a statement about it, saying it takes a community to create a healthy live service for League of Legends. So we have a channel with mods where they can report emergency issues from players threatening to harm themselves or others to service outages that can be directed to the team with a little delay. The NDAs are in place so we can protect player privacy and have meaningful conversations around security. Riot has a clear internal policy that Reddit is a channel for players by players, and we are guests there. But how bizarre is it that they're even saying that moderators can report players wanting to harm themselves and things like this? What business is that of Riot's necessarily? You don't enforce a duty of care, as we've evidenced by other stories. So this is weird, and the whole the whole issue really seemed to be underlined by the fact that I went out to all the other big esports subreddits and asked them, have you signed an NDA with the developer of your game? And they were like, well, no, we've never even been asked to. So it was that was true for Dota 2, that was true for StarCraft, that was true for everyone else. And that was why I was contacting some StarCraft 2 moderator back in the day, which this screenshot gets trotted out of me messaging him on Facebook, and apparently that's doxing him. I mean, again, you know, they've completely miscategorized me as often as possible at every turn, meanwhile obfuscating the obvious conspiracy that they're engaged in with these NDAs. Yeah, I mean, and it was all, of course, immediately covered up by Reddit, even though Reddit had a rule that says you may not enter into any form of agreement on behalf of Reddit or the subreddit which you moderate. That was Reddit's official rules in the user agreements for moderators. Crispy Crackers, who just so happens to play League of Legends, just so happens to go to events like TwitchCon, just so happens to be really interested in esports as a whole, and even organised a recent charity event with the League of Legends moderators. She said there is no rule on Reddit which prevents moderators signing an NDA in order to speak with gaming studios. The rule is that they are not to accept monetary compensation for moderator actions, which is not what's being done here. They are also not signing anything on behalf of Reddit. Rather, they're agreeing not to disclose confidential information that they might be given as individuals, which is the purpose of an NDA. And they arrived at that conclusion about 30 minutes after this story going out. Nothing to see here, folks. So, as a 1-2 punch, because I couldn't believe this was getting swept under the carpet, I published all of my findings in the investigation on March the 31st, and this proved several things: that the subreddit moderators were given gifts from Riot, they were given swag, they were told to email the Riot and they would give them gifts, that Riot had paid for the subreddit to be redesigned in 2012. when the new design was made public. That multiple moderators went on to become Riot employees, and as we've now seen, vice versa, they are ex-Riot employees in the current moderation team. That we have at least 2 moderators that we knew of who are actively seeking jobs with Riot that were in the interview process. We had moderators involved in private conversations with Riot staff about moderation techniques. And indeed, the subreddit moderators wrote to Jeffrey Light Lynn and asked him, what can we do to better improve our moderation technique using your models and your knowledge? Riot staff also have an open channel of communication, not just the Skype group, but they had a direct email where they could make requests for change on the layout or to add features to the subreddit. Mods, of course, also remove content that violates Riot's terms of service for playing League of Legends, even though it's meant to be an independent space. So I published all of these things, right, which shows that Riot have this unhealthy relationship with the subreddit, that shows that it is not an independent space, that shows that moderators are beholden to Riot. And of course, the resulting shitstorm is what would basically start the ball rolling to get my content banned by April.